Ever wondered how the world went from horse-drawn carts to towering skyscrapers? The Industrial Revolution reshaped everything we know: science, society, and our way of life. But what if you could fall asleep while learning how it all started? Join me as we journey through the heart of history. Together, we'll uncover the rise of machines, the people who changed the world, and the birth of the modern age. Close your eyes, relax, and let's explore the entire story of the Industrial Revolution. The story of the Industrial Revolution begins long before the steam engines roared to life and factories flooded the world with smoke. It starts with the simple needs of people and the environment around them. Europe, and especially Britain, had been changing for centuries, but by the late 1700s, these changes were about to kick into high gear. Imagine a time when almost everything was done by hand. Clothing was spun and woven by families in their homes. Metal was forged by blacksmiths with hammers and anvils, and farms depended on manual labor. This was the world before machines. But as the population grew, so did the demand for goods, and the old ways just couldn't keep up. People needed faster ways to produce, and that's when the spark of industrialization was lit. One of the key factors that set the stage for this revolution was the agricultural revolution. New farming techniques were introduced, such as crop rotation and selective breeding. These methods made farming more efficient, producing more food with less labor. With more food, the population grew, and people moved into cities looking for work. The availability of labor in cities would prove to be the driving force behind industrial change. Another important factor was the growth of trade. By the 18th century, Britain had a vast empire, stretching from North America to India. And this global trade provided access to raw materials like cotton, iron, and coal. These resources were essential for fueling the machines that would soon change the world. At the same time, new ideas about science and technology were emerging. Inventors and thinkers like James Watt, Richard Arkwright, and George Stephenson began to develop machines that would make it possible to produce goods faster, more efficiently, and on a much larger scale than ever before. So how did it all come together? It was a combination of technological breakthroughs, an increasing demand for goods, and a growing labor force that would make the Industrial Revolution possible. But the road ahead was not without its challenges. There would be struggles both for the workers and for the inventors as they navigated this new world. By the time the 18th century was drawing to a close, the foundations for the Industrial Revolution were set. The world was on the brink of a major transformation, and it was all due to one thing: the invention of new machines. Before the Industrial Revolution, goods were produced by hand in small workshops or at home. This meant that production was slow, expensive, and limited. But with the introduction of machines, everything changed. The first of these machines to make a real impact was the spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves in 1764. This simple yet powerful machine could spin multiple threads at once, greatly increasing the speed of textile production. The invention of the power loom by Edmund Cartwright in 1785 made weaving fabrics faster and more efficient. Together, these inventions revolutionized the textile industry and marked the beginning of factory-based manufacturing. But it wasn't just the textile industry that saw change. The invention of the steam engine by James Watt in 1775 was perhaps the most important technological advancement of the entire revolution. Watt's steam engine could power machines, ships, and even locomotives, making transportation and production faster than ever before. Steam engines soon powered factories, allowing them to operate more efficiently and at a larger scale. These engines could also be used to pump water out of mines, an essential task for the coal and iron industries. This meant that resources like coal and iron, critical for building machines and infrastructure, were more readily available than ever before. In addition to these machines, the development of new tools and techniques in metalworking and engineering allowed for faster and cheaper production of machinery. Richard Arkwright invented the water frame in 1769, which used water power to spin cotton into thread. This innovation led to the creation of the first factories, where workers could operate machines in large numbers to produce goods. As more factories opened, they required workers, men, women, and children who had to leave their farms and small villages to work in the cities. This marked the beginning of a massive shift in society, as people moved from rural areas to urban centers in search of employment. Despite the amazing progress in technology, These new machines also brought challenges. The rise of factories meant that work was no longer done at a steady pace. Machines ran non-stop, pushing workers to their limits. But for many, the promise of better wages and job security in the cities was enough to make the shift. With the arrival of machines, the factory system was born. It was the key structure of the Industrial Revolution, a system where goods were produced in large quantities in one location, often using steam-powered machines. Factories could now produce products much faster than before, leading to the rapid growth of industries like textiles, iron, and coal mining. The factory system had a huge impact on society. As factories sprung up, entire communities grew around them. Cities became overcrowded as people flocked from the countryside, eager to take up factory jobs. The change was massive. In the 1700s, Britain's population was still mostly rural. But by the 1800s, urban populations exploded. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool grew rapidly as people moved in for work. In many places, whole families, including children, worked long hours in factories. The need for labor was so great that children as young as 5 or 6 were employed, performing dangerous and exhausting tasks. Life in the cities, however, was far from glamorous. Overcrowding became a major issue. Housing was built quickly and cheaply, often in cramped, unsanitary conditions. Families lived in small, poorly ventilated rooms, and the streets were filled with dirt and waste. Disease spread rapidly in these tight-knit communities, and the lack of proper sanitation meant that outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and other illnesses were common. Despite these challenges, the new factory jobs offered higher wages than farming, which attracted many workers. The factory owners, driven by profits, didn't always prioritize the health and safety of their workers. Child labor was rampant, and many workers were subjected to long hours with little rest. Working conditions in factories were harsh. The machines, though revolutionary, were often dangerous. Workers could easily lose fingers or limbs if they weren't careful. Factory owners were primarily concerned with increasing production, so safety regulations were almost non-existent at this stage. The rise of the factory system also led to changes in work culture. No longer did workers have the freedom of working at their own pace. Factory owners set strict schedules, and workers were expected to keep up with the machines. This shift in how people worked led to the formation of early labor unions. As workers began to demand better wages, working conditions, and hours. As the factory system became the heart of industrial society, the class structure also began to change. The wealth generated by industrialization created a new middle class, the industrial capitalists who owned the factories and machines. Meanwhile, a growing working class, made up of factory workers and their families, faced harsh living and working conditions. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how goods were made, it also transformed how they were moved. One of the most significant advancements of the era was the development of transportation networks that connected factories to markets, allowing goods to be sold far and wide. Before the revolution, transportation was slow and unreliable. Goods were typically moved by horse-drawn wagons or ships, both of which were limited by weather and terrain. But as industrialization progressed, it became clear that a faster, more efficient way of moving goods was essential. The invention of the steam locomotive by George Stephenson in the early 19th century was a game-changer. In 1825, Stephenson's locomotion? No. One became the first successful steam-powered locomotive to pull a train on a public railway. This marked the beginning of a new era in transportation. The steam engine, which had already revolutionized industry, now found its way onto trains, allowing for faster travel across land. Railways began to expand rapidly throughout Britain and other parts of the world. By the mid-1800s, rail networks connected major cities, towns, and ports. This new system allowed raw materials, such as coal and iron, to be transported to factories and finished goods to be distributed to distant markets. The railways played a crucial role in expanding trade and boosting the economy. In addition to trains, the steamship also revolutionized transportation. Before steamships, sea travel relied on wind and sail, making it slow and unpredictable. The invention of the steamship, powered by steam engines, allowed for quicker and more reliable travel across oceans. By the 1830s and 1840s, steamships were crossing the Atlantic and other major bodies of water, opening up new trade routes and facilitating the global exchange of goods. Transportation didn't just benefit industries, it also improved everyday life. For the first time, people could travel quickly and easily over long distances. The advent of railways and steamships made travel more affordable and accessible, allowing people to visit relatives, move to new areas for work, or explore new places. This increase in mobility helped create a more connected world, where ideas and cultures could spread more rapidly. However, the development of transportation networks also had its downsides. The construction of railways and canals often required the forced displacement of people as land was cleared for new routes. Additionally, the environmental impact of these transportation networks was significant, as vast amounts of coal were burned to fuel steam engines, contributing to pollution and the destruction of natural landscapes. Despite these challenges, transportation played an essential role in the success of the Industrial Revolution. It connected industries to global markets, helped spread ideas, and made the world feel smaller and more interconnected than ever before. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change the way goods were produced, it also reshaped society in profound ways. The shift from an agrarian economy to an industrial one led to dramatic changes in the social structure, creating new opportunities but also new challenges for people. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in rural areas, working as farmers or in small-scale trades. The majority of people had a close connection to the land and their local communities. But with the rise of factories, many people began to migrate to cities in search of work. The growth of urban areas led to a massive shift in how people lived, worked, and interacted with one another. One of the most significant changes was the creation of a new social class, the industrial working class. This class was made up of men, women, and children who worked long hours in factories for low wages. Although the work was demanding and often dangerous, factory jobs were seen as a step up from the hard life of rural labor. As cities grew, so did the demand for workers, and the factory system became the backbone of industrial society. The rise of factories also contributed to the development of a new middle class. This class was composed of factory owners, business people, and professionals who benefited from the growth of industries. The middle class enjoyed greater wealth and status than the working class, and many became influential in politics and society. This new middle class was able to afford luxuries that were once reserved for the upper class, including education, leisure, and even private homes. But despite the growth of the middle class, the division between the wealthy and the poor became more pronounced. The upper class, made up of landowners, aristocrats, and business tycoons, held most of the power and wealth. They often lived in grand houses and estates, enjoying a lifestyle of comfort and privilege. In contrast, the working class lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions in the cities, struggling to survive on meager wages. For many, life in the cities was a harsh reality. Overcrowded housing, poor sanitation, and the constant noise and pollution of factories made life difficult. Workers often lived in tenements, small, poorly built apartments, where families were packed into tight quarters. These conditions were breeding grounds for disease, and outbreaks of cholera, tuberculosis, and typhoid were common. Despite these challenges, the working class began to organize in the early 19th century. Labor unions and movements for workers' rights grew as people fought for better working conditions, higher wages, and shorter hours. The rise of the industrial working class gave birth to a new wave of political activism, as people demanded their voices be heard and their rights be respected. On the other hand, the rise of the middle class brought with it new social values. The industrial middle class emphasized values like hard work, individualism, and self-reliance. These values often stood in contrast to the communal, family-oriented lifestyle of the working class. The growing divide between the rich and the poor highlighted the inequalities that existed in society, leading to social tensions that would continue to shape the future of industrialized nations. As the Industrial Revolution was transforming industries and cities, it was also reshaping how people communicated. New technologies in communication began to emerge that helped spread information, connect people across vast distances, and fuel the growth of industries even further. One of the most important innovations was the telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse in the 1830s. The telegraph revolutionized communication by allowing people to send messages over long distances in a matter of minutes, rather than days or weeks. This development was especially crucial for businesses, who could now communicate quickly about orders, shipments, and production needs. The telegraph worked by transmitting electrical signals through wires, which could then be translated into coded messages using Morse code. This allowed for rapid and efficient communication between factories, merchants, and governments. For example, railroads used the telegraph to coordinate train schedules, reducing accidents and improving efficiency. The telegraph also played a crucial role in the development of international communication, as messages could now be sent across oceans. Alongside the telegraph, the printing press continued to evolve during this period. While the printing press had been invented centuries earlier, its use became even more widespread during the Industrial Revolution. Newspapers, books, and pamphlets became more affordable, and the number of printed materials exploded. This allowed for the rapid spread of ideas, news, and information. The press helped popularize new scientific and political ideas. It gave a voice to the growing middle class, who used it to express their views on social issues and government. As communication technologies improved, so did the ability to spread ideas. The Industrial Revolution was not just about machines and factories. It was also about a shift in thinking. Philosophers, social reformers, and inventors were all coming together to challenge the old ways of thinking and propose new ideas. With the spread of print media and the telegraph, people were able to share their revolutionary ideas more easily. For example, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published their famous work, The Communist Manifesto, in 1848, which called for workers to unite and overthrow the capitalist system that they believed was exploiting them. Marx's ideas spread quickly through the press and helped inspire labor movements around the world. Similarly, other reformers like Robert Owen, who advocated for better working conditions and fair wages, gained support through the growing network of print media. The spread of ideas wasn't just limited to politics. Advances in science and technology were also communicated through journals, books, and newspapers. This helped fuel further innovation as scientists and inventors shared their discoveries and collaborated with others across the globe. New fields of study, such as chemistry, biology, and engineering, began to thrive as ideas spread more quickly than ever before. In this way, communication technology played a crucial role in the acceleration of progress during the Industrial Revolution. As new ideas circulated, they inspired more innovation, social change, and collaboration. The telegraph and printing press became the lifelines of a rapidly changing world, linking people, industries, and nations in ways never imagined before. As the world was being transformed by the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't just the economy, society, and technology that were changing, it was also the environment. The shift from agrarian economies to industrialized ones had significant consequences for the natural world. The rise of factories, railways, and steamships came at a cost, and the environment was paying the price. One of the most immediate impacts of industrialization was the widespread pollution that began to fill the air, water, and land. The burning of coal in factories, homes, and steam engines released enormous amounts of smoke and soot into the atmosphere. Cities like Manchester and London became notorious for their thick, black smog, which often reduced visibility and made the air difficult to breathe. The air quality was so poor that many workers in factories suffered from respiratory diseases, including coal workers' pneumoconiosis, black lung disease. The pollution didn't stop with the air. The coal and iron industries, which were at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, also caused significant damage to the land and water. The process of mining coal and iron created vast amounts of waste, which were often dumped into nearby rivers and lakes. This contamination of water sources led to a decline in water quality, making it difficult for people to access clean drinking water. In addition, the rapid expansion of factories in urban areas caused the destruction of natural habitats, as forests were cleared to make way for new industries and railways. The growth of railways and steamships, which were powered by coal, also had environmental consequences. The demand for coal skyrocketed, and mining operations expanded to meet this need. Large-scale coal mining led to the destruction of landscapes and ecosystems, as miners dug deep into the earth to extract the precious resource. The overuse of coal led to long-term environmental issues, including soil degradation and deforestation. In addition to environmental degradation, the Industrial Revolution had a significant impact on the climate. The burning of coal and other fossil fuels released large amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2, into the atmosphere, contributing to the greenhouse effect. While the full extent of climate change was not understood at the time, historians now recognize that the Industrial Revolution was a key turning point in the history of global warming. The increased use of fossil fuels set the stage for the modern climate crisis that we face today. Despite the negative environmental impacts, industrialization also led to some positive changes in the way people thought about nature. As pollution and environmental degradation became more apparent, there was a growing awareness of the need for conservation and environmental protection. In the late 19th century, the rise of environmental movements and the creation of national parks in countries like the United States marked the beginning of efforts to protect natural landscapes from industrial exploitation. However, the damage caused by the Industrial Revolution is still felt today. While many of the innovations that arose during this period helped improve lives in countless ways, they also set the stage for environmental challenges that continued to threaten the planet. The legacy of industrialization is a complex one, where progress and destruction go hand in hand. The Industrial Revolution did not only affect men and the working class, also had a profound impact on women and children. While it brought new opportunities for work, it also led to harsh conditions that shaped their lives in ways that had never been seen before. The industrial era marked the beginning of major changes in gender roles and the way children were viewed in society. Before industrialization, most women worked at home, managing the household and caring for children. The rural lifestyle also meant that women often helped with agricultural tasks, such as farming and tending to animals. However, as cities grew and factories emerged, many women left their rural homes and moved to urban areas to find work. Factory owners preferred to hire women and children because they could be paid lower wages than men, and the work was often seen as less demanding for women. Women were employed in a variety of industries, but the textile factories were the most common. They worked as spinners, weavers, and seamstresses, often under dangerous and exhausting conditions. Factories were hot, noisy, and poorly ventilated, which made the work even more grueling. Women worked long hours, sometimes up to 12 to 14 hours a day, and were paid very little for their labor. The rise of factory work also affected children. Child labor was rampant during the Industrial Revolution, with children as young as 5 or 6 working in factories. Factory owners preferred children because they were smaller and could crawl into tight spaces to fix machines. They were also paid even less than women. Children worked long hours under difficult conditions, with little regard for their health and well-being. Many suffered from physical injuries, and others were exposed to harmful chemicals, which caused long-term health issues. Life for women and children in the factories was not just physically demanding, it was mentally exhausting as well. The rigid schedules and constant pressure to keep up with machines led to stress, fatigue, and a lack of personal freedom. Women, in particular, found themselves balancing the demands of factory work with household responsibilities, as they still had to care for their families and maintain their homes in the limited free time they had. However, the Industrial Revolution also began to lay the groundwork for future social reforms. As the years passed, people started to see the exploitation of women and children in factories as unacceptable. The terrible working conditions led to public outcry, and soon, reformers began to push for better treatment of workers. In 1833, the Factory Act was passed in Britain, limiting the hours that children could work and setting a minimum age for factory labor. Other laws soon followed, aimed at improving the working conditions of women and children in industrial settings. While these early reforms were just the beginning, they marked a turning point in the treatment of women and children in the workforce. The changes that took place during the Industrial Revolution would eventually lead to broader movements for women's rights and child welfare, setting the stage for the social and political advances of the late 19th and 20th centuries. The Industrial Revolution was a catalyst for the rapid growth of the capitalist economy, changing the way businesses operated and how wealth was distributed. As industries grew and production expanded, so did the role of business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs. The Industrial Revolution marked a significant shift from agrarian economies to economies based on industrial production, leading to the rise of capitalism as the dominant economic system. At the heart of this new capitalist economy was the factory system. Factory owners invested in machines, raw materials, and labor to produce goods on a much larger scale than ever before. These owners became the new industrial capitalists, and their wealth grew exponentially as industries expanded. The factory system allowed them to control production, set prices, and dominate the market, making them incredibly wealthy and powerful. In addition to factory owners, investors also played a crucial role in the growth of the capitalist economy. Wealthy individuals and banks provided the capital necessary for industrial expansion. They financed the construction of factories, the development of new technologies, and the building of infrastructure like railways and steamships. In return, these investors made profits from the businesses they funded, which further fueled the growth of the economy. As industrialization spread, new markets for goods were created, both at home and abroad. The rise of the factory system allowed businesses to produce goods in large quantities, making them more affordable and accessible. These goods were then sold in markets across the world, contributing to the growth of international trade and the global economy. For the first time in history, nations could produce goods on a scale that met the demands of a rapidly growing population, leading to an era of global exchange and commerce. However, while the capitalist economy created enormous wealth for factory owners and investors, it also led to growing inequality. The divide between the wealthy industrialists and the working class became more pronounced as the benefits of industrialization were not shared equally. Factory workers who toiled long hours for low wages saw little improvement in their standard of living. Meanwhile, the owners of factories and businesses accumulated vast fortunes. This disparity between the rich and the poor led to social tensions and calls for reform. Labor movements and political activists began to push for changes in how the economy was structured. In some cases, this led to the formation of trade unions, which fought for better wages, shorter working hours, and improved working conditions. On a broader scale, thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels critiqued the capitalist system, arguing that it exploited workers and led to inequality. Despite these challenges, the growth of the capitalist economy during the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for modern industrialized nations. The rise of factories, banks, and multinational corporations helped shape the world we live in today. Capitalism, for all its faults, remains the dominant economic system in much of the world. And the Industrial Revolution was the driving force behind its rise. As industries grew and economies expanded during the Industrial Revolution, so did the need for raw materials, new markets, and investment opportunities. This led to the rise of global trade and imperialism. As industrialized nations sought to control vast parts of the world to secure resources and markets for their goods, the demand for resources like cotton, coal, rubber, and metals became crucial for industries, and the industrialized countries looked beyond their borders to acquire these materials. This led to an intense period of imperialism, where European nations, particularly Britain, France, and later Germany, expanded their empires by conquering territories across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Colonies provided cheap raw materials that were vital for fueling industrial growth, and in return, European powers established new markets to sell their manufactured goods. One of the most significant impacts of industrialization was the growth of the British Empire. Britain, as the first nation to industrialize, became the leading global power, controlling vast parts of the world. The empire spanned from India in the east to the Americas and parts of Africa in the west. British factories were fueled by resources extracted from these colonies, and their goods were sold in markets around the world, creating a cycle of trade that benefited industrialized nations while exploiting the colonies. The expansion of the British Empire was not without its controversies. The imperial powers used force to maintain control over colonies, often oppressing local populations and forcing them into labor. For example, in India, the British East India Company controlled the country's economy, exploiting its resources and labor force. Similarly, in Africa, European nations divided the continent among themselves, drawing borders without regard for the local cultures and traditions, leading to long-term social and political conflicts. This global system of trade and imperialism had profound economic consequences. While it benefited industrialized nations by providing cheap resources and markets for their goods, it also entrenched inequality on a global scale. The wealth generated by imperialism flowed primarily to the industrialized nations, while the colonies remained economically dependent and underdeveloped. The rise of global trade and imperialism also helped spread Western culture and ideas across the world. Industrialized nations exported their technological advancements, their legal systems, and even their languages to the colonies. However, this also led to the suppression of indigenous cultures and traditions. As Western ideas and practices became dominant, at the same time, the wealth generated by imperialism helped fund further industrialization. As European nations grew wealthier, they invested in new technologies and infrastructure, which further fueled the expansion of industrialization. This cycle of trade, exploitation, and growth contributed to the rapid spread of industrialization across Europe and eventually to other parts of the world. Despite the benefits for industrialized nations, the legacy of imperialism is controversial. The exploitation of colonies during the Industrial Revolution had long-lasting effects on the countries that were colonized, many of which still struggle with the consequences today. The social, economic, and political impact of imperialism remains a subject of intense debate and is an essential part of understanding the broader effects of the Industrial Revolution on the world. As industrialization spread, it gave birth to what we now recognize as modern capitalist societies. The rise of factories, large-scale production, the growth of global trade fundamentally changed the way societies were organized. People's roles in the economy, the relationship between labor and capital, and even the way nations governed themselves were all influenced by the shifting tides of industrialization. Before the Industrial Revolution, most societies were agrarian, with the majority of people living in rural areas and working in agriculture, but the advent of industrialization shifted the focus from agriculture to industry. This led to the growth of urban centers as factories became the heart of economies, attracting workers from the countryside. The factory system was organized in such a way that it favored capital owners, those who had the money to invest in machines, buildings, and labor. These industrial capitalists controlled much of the wealth and power, driving the expansion of industry and increasing their profits as factory production grew. In contrast, workers were often paid low wages, worked long hours, and had little power or voice in the workplace. This dynamic became the foundation of modern capitalist societies, a system in which wealth and power are concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority of people work for wages. While this system created unprecedented levels of wealth and progress, it also led to significant social and economic inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor widened. Factory owners, bankers, and other industrial capitalists lived in comfort and wealth, while the working class struggled to make ends meet. The industrialized nations became more productive and efficient, but the benefits were not equally distributed. In the midst of this inequality, labor movements began to emerge. Workers, tired of exploitation, started to organize and fight for their rights. Labor unions were formed to demand better wages, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions. These movements were a direct response to the harsh conditions faced by workers in factories, mines, and other industries. Over time, these labor movements gained ground, and workers began to win legal protections, including limits on working hours and the prohibition of child labor. The formation of unions also led to political change. As workers organized, they started pushing for political reforms that would help improve their living and working conditions. The rise of socialism and the push for universal suffrage were direct results of the changing political landscape created by the Industrial Revolution. The capitalist societies that emerged from this period also saw the rise of new political ideologies. Liberalism and conservatism became dominant political forces, with liberals advocating for free market economies, individual freedoms, and limited government intervention, while conservatives focused on preserving traditional values and hierarchies. At the same time, socialism emerged as a response to the inequalities created by capitalism. Thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels criticizing the capitalist system and calling for the redistribution of wealth and power. The transformation of societies during the Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for the modern world. The capitalist system created unprecedented wealth, but also sparked political and social movements that challenged the status quo. Over time, these movements would lead to major changes in the way societies were structured. influencing everything from government policies to the distribution of wealth and power. While the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, its influence quickly spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the rest of the world. The key innovations, such as the steam engine, factory production, and new transportation systems, had a profound impact on nations far beyond Britain's borders. As industrialization spread, it brought both progress and challenges to other nations. The first country to follow Britain's lead was Belgium, which began industrializing in the early 19th century. Belgium had rich coal reserves, a key resource for powering steam engines, and it quickly became one of the first European nations to build railways and factories. By the mid-1800s, Belgium had developed a strong industrial economy, centered around textiles, iron, and coal mining. It set the stage for other European nations to follow suit. France began industrializing in the mid-19th century but faced significant challenges. The French economy was primarily agrarian, and much of the country's infrastructure was underdeveloped compared to Britain. However, France had its own advantages, such as a strong state presence and government support for industrialization. By the 1870s, France had developed a significant industrial base, with textiles, steel production, and railways playing key roles in its growth. Germany also quickly followed Britain's lead and became one of the most industrialized countries in Europe. The German Empire, unified in 1871, saw rapid industrial growth, particularly in the areas of coal, steel, and chemicals. The development of heavy industry was supported by a highly educated workforce and state intervention, which helped fund the development of railroads and encourage the growth of key industries. By the end of the 19th century, Germany had emerged as one of the world's leading industrial powers. Meanwhile, the United States was also undergoing rapid industrialization during the same period. America was fortunate in that it had an abundance of natural resources, including coal, iron, and oil, which were essential for fueling industrial growth. The U.S. became a major producer of steel and coal in its transportation system, particularly the expansion of railroads, helped to connect the vast country and make it easier to distribute goods. The rise of American business magnates, such as Andrew Carnegie in steel and John D. Rockefeller in oil, led to the creation of large corporations that dominated the American economy. In contrast to the relatively smooth industrialization of European and American nations, industrialization in other parts of the world was much more complex. In Russia, for example, industrialization was slow and often forced. The Russian Empire was largely agrarian and backward compared to the Western powers. However, during the late 19th century, Tsarist Russia attempted to catch up with the rest of Europe by investing in railroads, factories, and steel production. Despite these efforts, industrialization in Russia was uneven and largely centered around major cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow. Rural areas remained largely agricultural and underdeveloped. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Industrial Revolution had a unique twist. Japan, which had been isolated from the rest of the world for centuries, began to industrialize rapidly after the Meiji Restoration. In 1868, the Japanese government played a central role in the country's industrial development, investing heavily in infrastructure, technology, and education. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed from a feudal society into a modern industrial power, particularly in textiles and steel. In colonial territories, industrialization was often imposed by the colonial powers, rather than developing organically. Many colonies were exploited for their raw materials, which were sent back to the imperial powers to fuel their own industrial growth. For example, in India, British rule oversaw the extraction of resources like cotton and tea, which were processed in British factories. Similarly, in Africa, colonies provided minerals, rubber, and other raw materials for European industries. But the local populations often remained excluded from the benefits of industrialization. As industrialization spread to different parts of the world, it created a new global economy, one that was more interconnected and interdependent than ever before. It allowed for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies across borders. But it also led to economic disparities, exploitation, and colonial domination. Industrialization was a global phenomenon, but its effects were felt differently depending on where you lived and who controlled the means of production. The Industrial Revolution, for all its advancements in technology and wealth, also brought about harsh social conditions for many. The rise of factories, overcrowded cities, and the exploitation of workers led to widespread social unrest. As the realities of industrial life became clearer, movements for social reform began to take shape, pushing for changes that would improve the lives of workers, women, children, and the poor. One of the most significant movements during this time was the rise of labor unions. As factory workers faced long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions, they began to organize for better rights and working conditions. Early unions were often met with resistance from factory owners and governments who viewed them as a threat to the economic order. However, as industrialization spread, workers began to realize the power of collective action. By the mid-19th century, trade unions had become more established. They played a key role in securing better wages, reduced working hours, and safer working environments. In Britain, the Factory Acts were introduced to regulate working hours and child labor in factories. The Factory Act of 1833, for example, limited the working hours for children and required factories to provide schooling for young workers. The 10 Hours Act of 1847 further limited the working hours for women and young workers in textile mills. In addition to labor movements, the Industrial Revolution also saw the rise of social reformers, who sought to address the inequalities caused by industrialization. One such figure was Robert Owen, a Welsh social reformer and industrialist, who was one of the first to advocate for the improvement of working conditions. He believed that a combination of better living conditions, education, and fair wages would improve workers' lives and create a more just society. Owen's vision of a better world extended to his own factories, where he introduced progressive measures like shorter workdays, the establishment of schools for workers, children, and better housing. The movement for women's rights also gained momentum during the Industrial Revolution. While women had always worked, the rise of factory labor brought new challenges. Women in factories were often subjected to long hours and unsafe working conditions, and they were paid significantly less than men. The feminist movement, led by figures like Mary Wollstonecraft and later Emmeline Pankhurst, began to call for changes in the legal and social status of women. The fight for suffrage, the right to vote, became a central issue for women in both the United States and Europe. In Britain, the Chartist movement also emerged, demanding political reforms and universal suffrage. The movement, which began in the 1830s, was driven by the working class and called for reforms such as the secret ballot, the right to vote for all men, and better representation in Parliament. Though many of the demands were not met immediately, the Chartists laid the groundwork for future political reform in Britain. Another major social issue that gained attention during this time was the problem of child labor. The rise of factories, children were often employed in dangerous and unhealthy environments, working long hours in factories, coal mines, and other industries. Many children were subjected to physical abuse and suffered from illnesses caused by poor working conditions. As the effects of child labor became more widely known, social reformers pushed for laws to protect children and restrict their work hours. The Factory Act of 1833 and the Children's Employment Commission, which investigated child labor, were significant steps toward ending child labor and ensuring that children could attend school rather than working in factories. Public health became another critical issue during the Industrial Revolution. Overcrowding in cities, poor sanitation, and pollution from factories led to widespread disease. Cities like London, Manchester, and Liverpool became breeding grounds for cholera, typhoid, and other diseases. The lack of proper sewage systems and clean water made life in these industrial cities hazardous, particularly for the poor. In response to these problems, reformers like Edwin Chadwick advocated for improvements in sanitation and public health. Chadwick's work led to the Public Health Act of 1848, which aimed to address the unsanitary conditions in industrial cities by promoting clean water, waste removal, and the regulation of urban living conditions. His efforts marked the beginning of modern urban planning and public health policies in Britain. While these social reforms were crucial in improving the lives of workers, women, children, and the poor, many issues remained unresolved. The struggle for workers' rights, women's rights, and social justice would continue for many years after the Industrial Revolution. And some of these struggles continue to this day. The Industrial Revolution was not only a time of social and economic change, but also an era of remarkable technological innovation. The breakthroughs in machinery, transportation, and communication during this period laid the foundation for the modern world we live in today. These new technologies didn't just change industries, they transformed every aspect of society. One of the most groundbreaking inventions of the time was the steam engine. Developed and improved by James Watt, Watt's steam engine was revolutionary because it could be applied to a wide range of industries, from textiles to mining to transportation. The steam engine powered the first trains, ships, and factories, helping to fuel the growth of industrial economies. Without the steam engine, the rapid expansion of factories and transportation networks would have been impossible. The development of the railroad was another key technological advancement. Early railways in Britain were powered by horses, but the introduction of steam-powered locomotives in the early 19th century revolutionized land transportation. The first successful steam-powered train, Stephenson's locomotion, No. 1, was launched in 1825 and proved that steam locomotives could be used for regular passenger and freight service. The railway system rapidly expanded across Europe and North America, shrinking distances and connecting cities, factories, and ports. Railroads enabled goods to be moved quickly and efficiently, making trade easier and boosting industrial growth. Alongside railways, steamships began to change the way people traveled across oceans. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, sea travel relied on wind-powered sails, which could be unreliable and slow. The introduction of steam-powered ships like the SS Great Western in 1837 allowed for faster and more reliable ocean travel. Steamships could navigate more easily against the wind and were not reliant on weather conditions, which revolutionized global trade and made international travel more accessible. In the realm of manufacturing, the introduction of interchangeable parts was another significant innovation. Before interchangeable parts, most products were made by hand, and each item was unique. This made mass production difficult. However, the introduction of standardized parts, pioneered by Eli Whitney in the early 1800s, allowed for the production of large quantities of identical items. This made it possible to assemble products quickly and efficiently, which greatly lowered costs and increased the availability of goods. In the field of communication, the Industrial Revolution saw the development of the telegraph, which revolutionized long-distance communication. Samuel Morse developed the telegraph in the 1830s, which allowed people to send messages over long distances by transmitting electrical signals through wires. Morse's invention, along with the creation of Morse code, enabled messages to be sent instantly, replacing the slower and less reliable methods of communication that had existed before. The telegraph was a critical tool for industries, railroads, and governments, as it allowed for the rapid transmission of information. The Industrial Revolution also spurred innovation in medicine. The increased awareness of public health problems, combined with new technologies, led to major advances in medical care. One such development was the vaccine. In the early 1800s, Edward Jenner developed the smallpox vaccine, which became the first successful vaccine and led to a global effort to eradicate the disease. Similarly, anesthesia was introduced during surgeries, making medical procedures less painful and more effective. Another notable technological development was the electromagnet and the discovery of electricity. Scientists like Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell made breakthroughs in understanding electromagnetism, laying the groundwork for the later development of electric power generation. In the late 19th century, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla would further develop electrical technologies, leading to the creation of electric lighting, motors, and eventually the modern electrical grid. These technological advances were not just innovations in machinery and infrastructure, they were the catalyst for the rapid transformation of society. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed how people worked, traveled, communicated, and even lived. Innovations like the steam engine, railroads, and telegraphs made the world more interconnected than ever before, while advancements in medicine improved public health and life expectancy. As the Industrial Revolution reshaped economies and societies, it also provoked significant political responses. The profound changes in social structure, labor, and wealth distribution led to the emergence of new political ideas and movements. The consequences of industrialization were felt not only in the factory and urban streets, but also in the political arenas of nations around the world. One of the most significant political responses to industrialization was the rise of socialism. as industrialization concentrated wealth in the hands of a few factory owners and capitalists, led to widespread poverty among the working classes. The harsh conditions in factories, along with child labor and low wages, sparked political and philosophical debates about the fairness of the capitalist system. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, two of the most influential thinkers of the time, became the leading figures in critiquing capitalism and advocating for a system where wealth and resources were shared more equally. In their famous work, The Communist Manifesto, 1848, Marx and Engels argued that the working class, or the proletariat, should overthrow the capitalist system and establish a society in which the means of production factories, land and resources were controlled by the people. This idea of a worker-controlled economy laid the foundation for modern socialist and communist movements, which would later influence revolutions and governments around the world. Marx's theories directly challenged the economic system that had arisen from the Industrial Revolution. While capitalism had driven economic growth and technological innovation, it had also created significant inequality. Marx believed that the exploitation of workers by capitalists led to a society where a small elite held power and wealth, while the majority lived in poverty. In his view, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, profited from the labor of the proletariat, creating an unjust and unsustainable system. In response to the growing political movements and critiques of industrial capitalism, governments began to implement social and economic reforms to address the issues of inequality, labor conditions, and wealth distribution. In Britain, the Factory Acts were passed in the early 19th century, limiting working hours for women and children and improving factory conditions. These early reforms, though limited, marked the beginning of state intervention in the economy and a recognition of the need to regulate industrial practices. The rise of liberalism also coincided with the Industrial Revolution. While socialism advocated for government intervention and wealth redistribution, liberalism focused on individual rights, free markets, and limited government. Liberals believed that industrialization, while creating inequality in the short term, would ultimately benefit society by providing cheaper goods, creating jobs, and promoting innovation. In Britain, the Whigs, a political party associated with liberalism, pushed for reforms like the expansion of voting rights and the establishment of free trade policies. In the United States, Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party advocated for the expansion of democratic rights and the promotion of individual freedoms, which they believed would drive the nation's prosperity. Conservatism also emerged as a political response to the social upheaval caused by industrialization. Conservatives, particularly in Europe, sought to preserve traditional social hierarchies and values in the face of rapid industrial change. They often resisted the reforms pushed by liberals and socialists, fearing that the expansion of voting rights and government intervention would undermine the established social order. In Britain, the Tories, later the Conservative Party, supported gradual reform but emphasized the importance of maintaining the monarchy and aristocracy as stabilizing forces in society. In the United States, industrialization and the rise of capitalism also led to political struggles over slavery and the expansion of territories. The wealth generated by industrialization, particularly in the North, was contrasted with the agrarian economy of the South, which was heavily reliant on slave labor. The debates between free labor and slave labor, as well as the question of how new states would be admitted to the Union, contributed to the growing tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, political movements focused on workers' rights, social welfare, and economic justice had gained momentum. The Labour Party in Britain and various labor unions around the world pushed for laws that protected workers and ensured fair wages, reasonable working hours, and better living conditions. The rise of these political movements represented a shift toward more progressive policies that sought to address the negative consequences of industrialization and promote social and economic equality. The Industrial Revolution didn't only transform the economy and politics, it also had a profound impact on art, literature, and culture. As industrialization reshaped society, it influenced the way people viewed the world around them. The rapid changes in technology, urbanization, and social structure were reflected in the artistic movements of the time, as well as in the literature and culture that emerged. One of the most notable artistic responses to industrialization was the Romantic movement, which emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries as a reaction against the dehumanizing effects of industrialization. Romantic artists and writers emphasized the importance of nature, emotion, and individualism. They sought to capture the beauty and power of the natural world, often depicting landscapes, rural life, and the sublime in their works. Prominent Romantic poets like William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Lord Byron wrote about the beauty of nature and the emotional struggles of individuals in a rapidly changing world. Their works often focused on the tension between industrial progress and the loss of a more harmonious connection to nature. For example, Wordsworth's famous poem lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey reflects the poet's longing for the peace and tranquility of nature, which he felt was being increasingly overshadowed by industrialization. In painting, artists like J.M.W. Turner and John Constable captured the changing landscapes of Britain during the Industrial Revolution. Turner's paintings, in particular, reflected the tension between nature and industrial progress. His iconic works, such as The Fighting Tamara, 1839, depicted the transition from the old world of sail to the new world of steam-powered ships. Turner's portrayal of steamships and smokestacks conveyed both the beauty and the destructive power of industrialization. However, the Industrial Revolution also gave rise to a new artistic style: realism. Realist artists sought to portray the harsh realities of everyday life, particularly the struggles of the working class. As cities grew and the factory system spread, realist artists focused on depicting the grim conditions of urban life, the labor of factory workers, and the social inequalities that accompanied industrialization. Artists like Gustave Courbet in France and Domé in both France and Britain captured the realities of industrial life in their paintings, sculptures, and lithographs. Courbet's The Stonebreakers, 1849, for example, depicted two laborers breaking stones by the side of the road, their faces grim and their bodies bent from the heavy work. This work was a stark contrast to the idealized depictions of nature and rural life in the Romantic style. The realists wanted to show life as it truly was, unvarnished and unromantic. In literature, the Industrial Revolution inspired a wave of writers who sought to explore the impact of industrialization on individuals and society. Writers like Charles Dickens in Britain and Victor Hugo in France focused on the hardships of the poor and the social injustices that arose from industrialization. Dickens' novels, such as Oliver Twist, 1837, and Hard Times, 1854, portrayed the brutal lives of factory workers, child laborers, and the impoverished masses in rapidly industrializing cities. His works criticized the exploitation of the working class and the lack of social reform during this time. In France, Hugo's Les Etienne Babet Le Chirard also dealt with themes of social justice, poverty, and the impact of industrialization on the lives of the poor. His depiction of the struggles of characters like Jean Valjean, a former convict trying to make a better life for himself, highlighted the deep inequalities that industrialization had exacerbated. In the United States, Mark Twain and Henry James explored the effects of industrialization on American society in the late 19th century. Twain's The Gilded Age 1873 critiqued the corruption and greed of industrial capitalists in post-Civil War America, while James' works examined the clash between the old genteel world and the new, industrialized America. As industrialization continued to reshape society, the cultural landscape responded with new ideas and artistic forms that reflected the struggles, triumphs, and challenges of the time. The rise of mass media, including newspapers, magazines, and later cinema, allowed these ideas to reach a broader audience, further shaping public perceptions of industrialization and its consequences. The Industrial Revolution also paved the way for the rise of consumer culture. As goods became cheaper and more widely available, people's lives were increasingly defined by their ability to buy and consume products. This shift in values is reflected in the art and culture of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as mass production became a defining characteristic of industrialized societies. The Industrial Revolution, while ushering in tremendous technological progress and economic growth, also set the stage for a growing environmental crisis. As factories sprawled across cities, railways cut through once pristine landscapes, and coal-burning steam engines powered industries and transportation, the natural environment began to suffer from pollution, deforestation, and a decline in air and water quality. These changes, while largely unnoticed at the time, planted the seeds for the rise of environmental awareness in the centuries to follow. The first major signs of industrial pollution became apparent in the rapidly expanding urban areas. Cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham in Britain, and New York and Chicago in the United States, saw their air quality rapidly deteriorate. Smoke from factories, coal-burning stoves, and steam engines created thick, choking smog that blanketed entire cities. The effects of this pollution were far-reaching. Poor visibility, respiratory diseases, and a general sense of discomfort became everyday experiences for city dwellers. It wasn't just the air that suffered. Water bodies became increasingly contaminated as industrial waste was dumped into rivers and lakes, making the water undrinkable and causing widespread disease. One of the most infamous examples of this pollution was the Great Smog of London in 1952. Though it occurred well after the Industrial Revolution, it was a direct result of centuries of unchecked industrialization. The smog lasted for several days, killing thousands and highlighting the deadly impact of industrial pollution. While this event occurred much later, it was the legacy of unchecked industrial growth, which began during the Industrial Revolution, that made such disasters possible. While early industrialization was marked by little concern for the environment, the negative consequences eventually prompted people to begin taking notice. Naturalists and scientists began to study the effects of industrialization on the environment. In the 19th century, as people saw more destruction of natural landscapes and wildlife habitats, the idea of conservation started to take root. One of the early pioneers of environmental conservation was John Muir, an American naturalist and conservationist, who in the late 19th and early 20th centuries pushed for the creation of national parks to protect the natural beauty of the United States from the encroaching industrial world. His advocacy led to the establishment of Yosemite National Park in 1890. Muir's work helped to shift public consciousness about the need to protect the natural world and preserve it from the ravages of industrialization. Another important figure in early environmentalism was Rachel Carson, whose book, Silent Spring 1962, raised awareness about the dangers of pesticides and their impact on the environment, particularly on birds and other wildlife. While Silent Spring was published long after the Industrial Revolution, it was part of a growing environmental consciousness that began during the 19th century. Carson's work is often credited with launching the modern environmental movement, which sought to address the ecological damage caused by industrial and chemical industries. The progressive era in the early 20th century also saw the rise of public interest in environmental issues, leading to the establishment of laws to protect the environment. The National Park Service was created in 1916 in the U.S. to preserve and manage national parks and monuments. Similarly, the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the United States marked significant steps toward addressing the industrial pollution that had grown unchecked for over a century. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on the environment is also seen in the rise of urban planning. As cities grew at an unprecedented rate, the consequences of overcrowded, polluted urban environments became increasingly evident. Planners began to recognize the importance of green spaces, public parks, and clean air. Cities like Paris and London began to implement urban planning measures that included better sanitation, public health systems, and environmental protection. In the later stages of industrialization, as the world entered the 20th century, there was a growing recognition that environmental damage was not just an issue for the future, but an immediate problem that needed addressing. The need for sustainable development became a central focus, and industries began to slowly shift toward cleaner, more efficient technologies that could reduce their environmental impact. Today, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution continues to shape the global conversation on environmentalism. The industrial practices that were developed in the 19th and early 20th centuries laid the groundwork for the modern environmental challenges we face today, including climate change, deforestation, and loss of biodiversity. However, the rise of environmental awareness, sparked by the negative effects of industrialization, also led to the development of policies movements, and technologies aimed at protecting the planet. The Industrial Revolution may have begun more than 2 centuries ago, but its impact is still felt today. The innovations, societal changes, and economic shifts that began in the late 18th century laid the foundation for much of the modern world. From the development of global trade networks to the rise of mass production, and the technological advancements that followed, the Industrial Revolution transformed every aspect of human life, creating both immense progress and significant challenges. One of the most lasting legacies of the Industrial Revolution is the global capitalist economy that emerged during this period. The revolution set the stage for the development of multinational corporations, the expansion of global trade, and the rise of consumer culture. The idea of mass production and consumption that was pioneered during the Industrial Revolution continues to define modern economies. With goods being produced and distributed around the world at unprecedented rates. Today, global supply chains connect countries across continents, making it possible to manufacture products in one part of the world and sell them in another. The Industrial Revolution also brought about the growth of urbanization, a trend that continues to shape the world. In the 19th century, people moved from rural areas to cities in search of work in factories. This migration led to the rapid growth of cities, many of which became overcrowded and polluted. Today, more than half of the world's population lives in urban areas, and cities continue to expand. The lessons learned from the rapid urbanization of the 19th century, including the need for better infrastructure, sanitation, and housing, continue to inform urban planning today. Technological innovation remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Industrial Revolution. The steam engine, electricity, and the telegraph laid the groundwork for the vast array of technologies that followed, from the internal combustion engine to the internet. The innovations of the Industrial Revolution fueled the Second Industrial Revolution. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which brought new developments in steel production, electricity, and telecommunications, these technologies set the stage for the modern digital age, with computers, smartphones, and the internet transforming how we work, communicate, and live. However, the legacy of industrialization is not without its darker aspects. The exploitation of labor, particularly child labor, and the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few individuals remain ongoing concerns. The environmental degradation caused by the burning of fossil fuels and the depletion of natural resources are issues that are still being dealt with today. Climate change, a direct result of industrialization's reliance on coal, oil, and other fossil fuels, is one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. In response to these challenges, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution has also led to the rise of social and environmental movements. Labor unions, women's rights groups, environmental organizations have all fought to address the injustices that arose from industrialization. Today, discussions about sustainable development, corporate responsibility, and climate action are at the forefront of global politics and policy. The Industrial Revolution also left a profound impact on political ideologies. The rise of capitalism, socialism, and labor rights movements shaped the political landscape of the modern world. The idea of economic equality and the rights of workers continue to be central to debates about the role of government, the free market, and social justice. The evolution of labor laws, universal suffrage, the development of welfare systems were all influenced by the struggles of workers during the Industrial Revolution. In education, the revolution brought about a shift in how knowledge was shared. The rise of public education, particularly in industrialized nations, is part of the broader social reforms that were pushed for during this period. The demand for skilled labor in factories led to the establishment of schools and technical institutes that would teach the trades necessary for industrial work. Today, education systems around the world are still shaped by the demands for skills in a technological, industrialized society. The scientific revolution that accompanied industrialization laid the groundwork for countless discoveries in medicine, engineering, and technology. The advances in medical science, particularly in the areas of vaccination, anesthesia, and sanitation, dramatically improved life expectancy and quality of life. These breakthroughs helped create the modern healthcare system we rely on today. In conclusion, the Industrial Revolution's legacy is both vast and complex, While it brought about unprecedented progress in technology, communication, and industry, it also created social, political, and environmental challenges that continue to shape the modern world. The period of industrialization not only transformed the way we produce goods, but also the way we live, work, and interact with each other. Its influence continues to be felt in every aspect of modern society, from the economy and politics to culture, education, and the environment. The Industrial Revolution was not just a localized phenomenon. Its effects were felt around the world, shaping the course of history in both the developed and developing nations. While the revolution began in Britain, it spread across Europe, North America, and eventually to other parts of the world, leading to significant changes in economic structures, political systems, and social dynamics. The global impact of industrialization was profound, influencing everything from labor relations to the structure of global trade. As the Industrial Revolution took hold in Britain, other European nations quickly followed suit. France and Germany were among the first to industrialize outside of Britain, although they faced different challenges. France's industrial growth was slower due to political instability and a lack of coal resources. But by the mid-19th century, it had begun to industrialize rapidly, particularly in textiles, iron, and transportation. Germany saw some of the most significant industrial growth in the late 19th century, emerging as a leading industrial power due to its rich natural resources, skilled labor force, and strong government support for industrialization. In the United States, industrialization came later than in Europe, but transformed the nation into one of the world's most powerful industrial economies by the late 19th century. America's vast natural resources, such as coal, iron, and oil, provided the foundation for rapid industrialization, particularly in industries like steel, textiles, and automobiles. The growth of factories, railroads, and cities played a crucial role in reshaping American society. Industrialization in the U.S. also led to the rise of powerful businessmen, like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, who controlled vast industries and became symbols of both the potential and the excesses of industrial capitalism. The effects of the Industrial Revolution extended beyond Europe and North America. In Asia, countries like Japan were quick to adopt industrial practices in the late 19th century. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 marked the beginning of Japan's rapid industrialization. The Japanese government adopted Western industrial techniques, built railways, and developed a strong manufacturing base. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed into a global industrial power, challenging traditional powers like China and Russia. In India, the effects of industrialization were largely shaped by British colonial rule. The British used India as a source of raw materials, like cotton, which were processed in British factories. While India did not industrialize in the same way as Britain or Japan, the British built railroads, factories, and infrastructure that connected Indian regions to the global economy. This led to the integration of India into the British Empire's economic system. But it also left the country economically dependent on Britain. The economic effects of British industrialization are still felt in India today, where industrialization has become a key driver of growth in the modern era. In Africa, industrialization had a more exploitative role. European powers, driven by the need for raw materials to feed their factories, colonized much of Africa, extracting resources like rubber, diamonds, and minerals. The industrialized nations saw Africa primarily as a source of raw materials rather than a place to build industries. The legacy of colonial exploitation continues to affect Africa's economic development. As many African nations still struggle with economic dependence on primary exports and a lack of industrial infrastructure, the Industrial Revolution also had significant effects on global trade. The creation of vast industrial empires led to the growth of international markets for goods. Industrialized nations could produce more goods than they could consume, so they sought new markets for their products. The rise of railways, steamships, and telegraphs allowed for faster and cheaper transportation of goods, leading to the growth of international trade networks. As global trade expanded, industrialized nations began to dominate world markets, exporting manufactured goods and importing raw materials from the colonies and less developed nations. However, this global economic system also created economic inequalities. The wealth generated by industrialization was concentrated in the hands of a few nations and individuals. While much of the rest of the world remained dependent on the export of raw materials, as industrialized nations grew richer, many known industrialized nations faced poverty, underdevelopment, and exploitation. The Industrial Revolution also laid the groundwork for the global economic system we have today, with multinational corporations, global trade, and interconnected economies. The legacy of industrialization can be seen in the way that the world is still deeply interconnected, with supply chains, markets, and industries stretching across continents. The rise of global capitalism, sparked by the Industrial Revolution, has shaped the modern global economy, creating a system in which wealth, power, and resources are distributed unequally across nations. As we look back on the Industrial Revolution, it is clear that its legacy is both vast and complex. The revolution brought about unprecedented economic growth, technological innovation, and social change. But it also created new challenges and inequalities that we continue to face today. It fundamentally transforms the world in ways that we are still grappling with. From the rise of modern capitalism and urbanization to the environmental crises and social movements that emerged in its wake, at its core, the Industrial Revolution marked a turning point in human history. It shifted societies from agrarian economies to industrialized ones, forever changing how people lived, worked, and interacted with each other. For the first time in history, it became possible to produce goods on a massive scale, leading to the rise of factories, mass production, and the modern consumer culture that shapes our world today. The rapid advances in technology, such as the steam engine, the railroad, and the telegraph, connected people and nations in ways that had never been possible before. Yet, as much as the Industrial Revolution created wealth and opportunity, it also deepened inequality. The benefits of industrialization were not equally distributed. While industrialists and capitalists amassed fortunes, the working class, particularly those working in factories, faced exploitation, poor living conditions, and long hours. Women and children were often forced to work in dangerous environments for low wages, and the working class in urban areas lived in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. This division between the wealthy elite and the working poor created significant social tensions, which led to political movements, labor unions, and calls for reform that would shape the future of industrialized societies. The environmental consequences of industrialization also became evident. With pollution, deforestation, and the depletion of natural resources, the burning of coal, the rise of steam-powered engines, and the expansion of factories all contributed to the degradation of the environment. These changes were not only visible in the immediate effects of pollution in urban centers, but also set the stage for the environmental crises that we are witnessing today, such as climate change, deforestation, and the loss of biodiversity. The Industrial Revolution's reliance on fossil fuels has had long-lasting effects on the planet, and the push for sustainability and renewable energy today is a direct response to the environmental legacy of industrialization. Despite the hardships, the Industrial Revolution also brought about significant improvements in technology and medicine. It laid the foundation for the technological innovations that followed, from the electric revolution to the digital age. The creation of railroads, steamships, and telegraphs connected the world in ways that had never been possible. And the medical advances that came out of this period, such as vaccination, sanitation, and anesthesia, significantly improved public health and life expectancy. These advancements not only improved lives during the industrial period, but also paved the way for the modern world. Socially, the Industrial Revolution gave rise to political movements that would have far-reaching effects. The struggles of the working class for better conditions and rights led to the creation of labor laws, the rise of trade unions, and the expansion of suffrage. The socialist and communist movements that emerged during this time challenged the existing economic systems. While liberalism and conservatism defined the political debates of the time, these ideologies, born from the social upheavals of industrialization, continue to shape the political landscape today. Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of the Industrial Revolution is the global economic system it helped create. The rise of capitalism, the spread of industrialization to other parts of the world, and the development of global trade networks all stemmed from the changes brought about during this period. This interconnected global economy continues to define the modern world, creating both opportunities and challenges for nations around the globe. Looking forward, we are faced with the task of addressing the negative impacts of industrialization, while preserving and building upon its positive legacies. The lessons learned from the Industrial Revolution have led to movements for workers' rights, social justice, and environmental protection. Today, the world is grappling with how to balance industrial growth with sustainability, how to ensure that the benefits of progress are shared more equally, and how to adapt to the rapidly changing technological landscape. The Industrial Revolution was a time of extraordinary change and transformation. Its impact on technology, economy, society, and the environment cannot be overstated. As we move into the future, we must continue to reflect on its lessons, learn from its mistakes, and build on its successes to create a more sustainable and just world.